We're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully, you can see my screen. It's not so important that you can see James or I, but do want to call your attention again. I start this thing the same way. If you've watched any of our back episodes from our website or like from a podcast forum, which I highly doubt, but hey, hope springs eternal. We always start off with a shout out or a plug to the Facebook Evidence Management Community Forum. That's something that we started in the middle of the pandemic just to give people a place to hang out and ask questions specifically about evidence, especially when there just was no place to go. There wasn't a place to go ask those questions because all the conferences and training classes had shut down. We're not there anymore, but that's still a vibrant group that is growing. And I'm going to try to advance this slide. I'd also like to say hello and thank you to Tracker Products. We've got a partnership with Tracker. They keep the lights on here. So for that, we are thankful. They're an evidence management software company. And if you'd like to learn more about them, you can either tune in 3 weeks in our next episode, but that's really top secret. I'm bearing the lead, or you can visit their website at trackerproducts.com. So I would encourage you to look them up. Uh, Not just because they keep the lights on, but because they do good work. And if you're curious about what James and I do, you can look at evidencemanagement.com on the interweb and find out more. There are a lot of resources on our website, and we try to keep it relevant and keep good information there and available at your fingertips. There's a couple of fun things that you can do that are absolutely free. You can do an e-health check. You can sign up there to get kind of a mini self-assessment of your own operations, and that could actually be pretty useful for talking with folks at your agency about your issues. But all of that is not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about our topic du jour, which is submit it and forget it, changing or creating evidence culture change at your agency. And this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart and to James's as well.
Yes.
And this is kind of what we're about. This is the thing that kind of drives us forward. The mission of this particular organization is uh, to to push culture change, to change the culture of evidence management for all the stakeholders in the process. And that's really what drives us. That's why we do what we do, because we think it's important and we think that there is value there. This is just kind of an extension of that. So this this whole little diatribe, it might get a little preachy. We apologize. But we really do believe in this stuff and we really are passionate about it. And that's why we want to talk about it. I don't think we can talk about it too much, but I think people would stop watching if we did. So we won't. But you might ask yourself, what are we talking about? So today we're going to talk about changing the culture of evidence. We're going to talk a little bit about the epicenter of change. Where does change begin? And then we'll talk about 10 forward steps that you can do at your agency right now, today, with no approval necessary. This is just stuff you can do right now that will impact the culture of evidence at your operations. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing next time on the show. You have anything, James?
No, nothing so far.
All right. James is a trooper. He literally just got off of work and rushed over to his house in sunny Southern California to be with us. So thank you, James. So let's talk a little bit about the
My
evidence
pleasure.
that
Thank you. Have a good appointment.
you bet. Changing the culture of evidence. Uh, there are a few commonalities. Shouldn't use the same word twice, but there are few common features of what I would consider the culture of evidence to be in law enforcement today. And typically they can be characterized by the things you see on your screen. One of my least favorite is the submit it and forget it culture at an agency, where an officer submits their evidence and then they just forget about it. They don't respond to requests, they don't respond to disposition, you know, information. They consider it gone. As soon as they submit it, as soon as they put it in the temporary locker, they consider it no longer their issue. And that's one of the more toxic elements in our culture that we're trying to get rid of. Another non-favorite, these are all bad things, by the way, is neither seen nor heard. I mean, we work behind locked doors, so no one sees us. And as a consequence, our culture around our industry can be that we're definitely not seen, but we're also not heard. So these are just some of the things that are common and pervasive throughout our culture that we're working on trying to find solutions for. Then you have the guns versus craft bags debate. Typically in law enforcement, uh, they love to spend money on things that go boom, things that have molly attachments, things that are black or Velcro, or even better, matte black with molly and Velcro and a gun. We love to spend money there, but we don't necessarily invest money on the things that we can't see, and that's not uncommon. I mean that happens at a lot of agencies and a lot of places, and that's part of the culture. I don't know uh, what we can do to impact that particular thing because we definitely have. Look up here. Oh, my screen is paused. There we go. Thank you, Jake. Jake let me know that you could only see one screen. Man, I had so many other pretty slides that you just totally missed out on. I'm just going to go back through them because they're masterpieces. See, look, there was that slide that would have given you some information. That's a nice introduction slide. That's a nice slide. So we'll go back. There's a tracker slide. Okay, now you've seen them all. Thank you, Jake.
Very nice,
We are
Shawn.
not we are not professionals. We are amateurs in the trenches. So this is what we do uh, today. You see. So the guns versus craft bags debate. Don't know what we can move the needle there because all of law enforcement needs to be appropriately funded. We just need to make sure that those resources get to evidence custodians and evidence managers as well. And then you have in many agencies the concept of the evidence vault being like the penalty box, which is like I've already said my least favorite. All of these are my least favorite. If I could group them into all of one category, these are my least favorite things. But agencies that use the evidence vault or evidence unit as a punishment. And I honestly, I came from an agency like that. I was put there for that very reason. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to make it my passion. I'm going to make it my life's work. And there are ways to reverse that effect, but it has very, very harmful effects on our industry, especially when it's done improperly. Another one of my all time least favorites is this phrase, the way we've always done it. And when that is used as an excuse for doing things that don't make any sense, for things that are excessively time consuming, uh, that kind of culture at an agency is toxic and it almost guarantees continued failure. Uh, I hate that phrase. Well, that's the way we've always done it.
Right.
And that's that's always a bad phrase or a bad reason for doing anything. Um, Last thing I want to talk about is kind of the negative culture. Uh, this is what kind of got me. This is where I kind of got stuck personally. I viewed the evidence vault kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. And I don't know if you're familiar with Greek mythology. There's a picture of Sisyphus on the screen, but basically, Sisyphus was condemned to pushing a huge stone up a hill every day. And at the end of every day, for eternity, that stone would roll back down to the ground. And he spent every day pushing that stone up the hill. And it was just a cycle. It was purposeless labor.
It's very similar to intake and dispo, I think, right?
It feels that way. And I think
Can
when
you hear
we
me?
look, yeah,
Perfect.
you're kind of breaking up. But it does. It definitely feels that way,
Okay.
and we can fall into that trap where our jobs feel like this purposeless pushing of a rock uphill every day, and then it just falls right back down. And there are reasons for that. Evidence is always going to come in. Evidence is always going to go out. A lot of the things that we do every day, we're going to do again tomorrow. But when you start looking at it as this hopeless, endless cycle, an eternal cycle that you can't escape from, it kind of starts to weigh on you a little bit. Uh, so that's why we're talking about changing the culture. Those are some elements of the culture that exist. We don't want to spend a lot of time on that because there's not a lot of value in spending time on that, quite honestly. We all kind of get that. You might work in an agency that is defined by one or more of those things. And so we're not going to spend much time on it. What I do want to talk about is how do we change that? How do we move the needle on any of those things? And I've spent the last 10 years professionally trying to answer that question and trying to help resolve that question uh, through training and through consulting, through working in an evidence room, through participating with evidence organizations. That's what I spend my time trying to crack the code here, trying to figure this out. That's what James does on a daily basis. He does it with me at the Evidence Management Institute. He does it with boots on the ground at Orange County. So this is what we're about, trying to figure out how to change that. And really, it's an ongoing discussion because there is no pat answer. There is no solution that is just in a little can that we can open for you and say, hey, do this. It works perfectly every time because that doesn't exist. But I do think it's important to look at the change process a little bit, especially for evidence custodians, and figure out where can we begin to move the needle. So let's look real quick at what I consider the epicenter of change. Like, where does change originate? Where does it begin? I always wanted, when I was running an evidence room for the Carrollton Police Department, I always wanted like Deus ex machina. I was a former English teacher. I'm a recovering English teacher. So that's God intervenes. I wanted someone to come in from on high and just fix everything for me. I wanted that to happen magically. I wanted it to happen immediately, and I wanted it to happen permanently. And that just never happens. So change doesn't just magically appear. So where does it start? How does it start? How can we get it to start? And then how can we get it to sustain? Those are really important questions that we're still trying to figure out. But I have figured out a few things that I think might be helpful just to share today, just as we have a discussion. And again, if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you disagree with anything, if you hear something that shocks the conscience and you just want to vent about it, go ahead and put it in the little question window right there. Because it's actually more fun to have a conversation than to talk to the Ricky Bobby screen. But change rarely originates from complaining. Like, I love to complain. As a police officer and an art department, I felt like it was a sport, and I felt like I was probably at the top of my game. I could complain about anything, and to this day, I still can find myself. It's very easy to complain. Now, but change, there was almost zero measurable change that resulted from my complaining. Complaining is just being able to observe something wrong. It's knowing that a problem exists. But change doesn't happen there until you start looking at the other side of the complaint. Underneath every complaint can be a very legitimate issue that needs to be addressed. So I'm not saying that complaints are unfounded, but if we change our focus from complaints to solutions, that's kind of where change starts to happen, because a complaint is static. I mean, it has no resolution in of itself. It's almost a thing that we do just to pass the time. So that's one thing to just think about for a little bit as we discuss these other things. And change also rarely grows from the outside in, especially for evidence custodians. There's no one outside of your unit that sees inside your unit on a regular basis, more than likely. So, with that being said, especially for us, change usually doesn't come from the outside in. Now, it can. I mean, you can have a very proactive chief or a very proactive chain of command. You can have a magical fairy, an evidence fairy show up and try to solve things for you in your dreams. But that's not usually where it happens. Our chiefs usually don't spend much, if any, time in the vault, and that's okay. Evidence fairies don't exist. Uh, our chain of command typically has to be educated on issues so they'll even know that be aware of those issues. So that kind of change rarely happens from the outside in. So that's outside the epicenter. If we look inside the epicenter where change actually occurs, there's two things I want you to think about really quick. And then we'll move on to the 10 things that you can actually do today to create and start that change process. It's one that change, culture change, anywhere, doesn't matter what we're talking about, doesn't matter where we're talking about it, it rarely occurs without personal change. Cultures don't change unless people change. We look at our messed up, divided country right now, none of that's going to change until people change. And who knows? We're not here to talk about or debate that today. Uh, the answer might be never. But what we do know is that nothing really is going to change until people start to change. And so that leads us to one conclusion. For evidence custodians in an evidence operation, dealing with an evidence culture that is highlighted by any of those factors that we listed, you're the epicenter of change. You have to be. There is no other source, there is no other origin for change other than you. And by just accepting that and thinking about that, the next logical question is, all right, if I'm the epicenter of change, if I am the change agent at my organization, then I got two paths. I can do nothing or I can do something. And what we want to talk about today are the 10 somethings that you can do that might make an impact and might begin that culture change process for you, your agency, and this industry. And that's what we want to talk about today. Those are the 10 simple things that we can do. I understand, and I know that was awkward. I had to scratch my ear, but I understand that we don't have a lot of control. A lot of us at the line level don't have a lot of control over budgets. We don't have a lot of control over staffing. We don't have a lot of control over facilities. We are not in control. And the good news is nobody is truly in control. Uh, it's an illusion. It doesn't exist. But for us, we got to focus on something else. If we don't have the authority, then we got to start developing our influence. And influence is possible, but it has to originate somewhere. So let's talk about 10 things you can do right now, today, to implement or begin that change process. Number one, if you can't change your name, change your perspective. I wish that evidence custodians would call themselves evidence curators and that we wouldn't refer to uh, the vault. I mean, the vault's not a bad name, it connotes security. The warehouse, not my favorite. Hell, that's probably my least favorite. Or a
Dungeon.
dungeon, basement, yeah, any of those. We're not warehouse clerks. We're curators of the museum of everything bad that has ever happened in your jurisdiction. So we got to start thinking of ourselves like that. Even if you don't change what you call yourself, changing your perspective from this is a warehouse of stuff to this is a museum of things that deserve and need to be preserved and protected for as long as I have to retain them. Changing that perspective is one important step that you can take today. I'm not going to look at this stuff as junk. I'm not going to look at this stuff as a problem. I'm going to look at this stuff as having the potential to exonerate, having the potential to convict, having the potential to reunite someone with something that they've lost. This is somebody's property. There are constitutional rights and implications associated with this stuff. Justice hinges on the stuff that we preserve in our museum. And maybe just by changing that perspective, it might help us kind of reframe some of the discussion, that self talk that we have about our jobs, especially when we start feeling like nobody cares, nobody loves me. I'm going to go home and eat some worms. Uh, so that's number one. If you can't change your name, change your perspective. Number two, don't believe the hype. Read carefully and think for yourself. I've got two stories. One from this week about Dallas PD's evidence. The only thing you see there is Dallas PD evidence. And James had a very similar circumstance at Orange County. You see a headline, Orange County evidence booking scandal. You read those two headlines, and the first thing that you assume is that that evidence unit did something bad. And honestly, headlines are not good resources for guiding our thoughts and beliefs about evidence management. I know that a lot of people love to read headlines and love to post stories about evidence. I don't find any value in that at all, except for their utility and value to teach us things. But both Orange County and the city of Dallas both had massive, massive headlines in the last few months about their evidence practices. But if you actually read the story, it's not an evidence custodian issue. It's not an evidence management issue. It's getting the evidence to the unit or digital evidence that is beyond the purview, beyond the control of the evidence custodians at Dallas PD. We're not talking about what that headline suggests is not the problem. There are other problems that need to be addressed, but I think we get caught up in that. And I think it's really important to control the narrative or at least read carefully before we fall into a pattern of just looking at a headline and thinking, oh crap, another problem. Uh, that's why I don't like when I teach, I don't use headlines. I don't use news stories unless there's a teachable issue here. Like there are things that we could learn from Orange County. There are things that James had told me that he's learned, but it's not about evidence custodians doing their job. It's what can we do to make sure that we safeguard this process and protect this process. There are things that Dallas PD is going to learn about preserving digital evidence, but it has nothing to do with the way they store and house physical evidence at their department. It's so be careful when you read the headlines. Be careful of using that information or leaning on that information to shape your worldview about the industry that you work in. Anything, James?
No, I mean, just know that if you are caught up in some type of scandal or your agency is under a negative light, um, eh, 9 times out of 10, it's the evidence unit that finds those issues and steps forward as we should with our integrity to make sure that they get resolved. And when you do that, don't expect a pat on the back. Don't expect anyone to come out and say, "Hey, good job burning, these people or whatnot." So just do your job and do it as professionally as you probably do already, and just kind of know that if there is something that goes down, beyond the obligation of reporting it, just know that that's probably not it's probably not going to help your unit at all. But um, you know, it is what it is, kind of.
Yeah, and I think I mean, yeah, just I don't even know what to say. It's just it can be a mess. So number three, garbage in, garbage out. I mean, we are all byproducts of the information that we feed on. And doesn't matter where you get your news, whether it's slanted to the left or slanted to the right, it's slanted. And so whatever information you put in your head, that takes up space in your head. And our heads only have so much room to take up information. What I would encourage you to do today is look at what you're putting into your brain, especially with respect to evidence. Um, Spend time instead of spending that time complaining or spending that time reading headlines about how terrible everything is or chatting about how awful the world is. Look at your budget. Go ask, go search out and find exactly how much budget money you have, what the line items are for the budget for your specific unit. Even if you can't impact it, knowing it has value. Spend some time reading through policies and procedures for your agency and make sure that you do what you say you do. Uh, these aren't fun things, but they're things that you could absolutely do today to start changing the culture at your agency and start changing the culture of evidence at your agency. You might read a policy and realize we don't do that anymore. Integrity is doing what you say you do. So we might need to look at that policy. We might need to look at this procedure. You might find a procedure that instructs officers on the wrong way to do something. It's outdated, it hasn't been replaced. Unless you review those periodically and unless you know those like the back of your hand, uh, you're not going to spot those problems. That's why good information, just overload yourself with good information. Um, that's kind of one of those next steps. That biological evidence preservation handbook, read that thing from cover to cover if you haven't done it before. I know I mention that book all the time, and I do because it's a great resource and it gives you lots of good information. Instead of spending, you know, 10 minutes reading headlines about all the awful things that happen in evidence management, spend that same 10 minutes reading that handbook. I promise you, you'll get something from that that is going to benefit you, that's going to be of value, that's going to be a good piece of information to have in the back of your head. You're the expert at your agency. People rely on you to know what to do when it comes to evidence. Even if it's day one, you're the expert because nobody else knows as much as you do about your unit. So spend that time putting good information inside your brain pan. It will benefit you. I promise you. Uh, number, oh man, I think I misnumbered. Yeah, I did. So we might have nine, we might have 10 because yeah. Number three would be seek community. Join that Facebook community forum. Join MAPE, the Missouri Association for Property Evidence. Join TAPE It, the Texas Association. Join CAPE. Join PEEF. Join an evidence association today if you don't belong to one. I mean, I count the number of people on the line. I hope that those people, I hope all those people are on the line. If you're watching tomorrow or the next day or the next week, it's not too late. Seek out community, build community, join a community. If you don't want to do that, here's my suggestion. Now, the easiest thing to do today to impact culture, the culture of evidence at your agency, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call an evidence custodian in the town right next to you. Ask them to go to lunch and find out about their operations. You know, that is a very easy thing to do. And that act in and of itself is not a big special thing. Going to lunch is nice, but the act of picking up the phone, being proactive, calling somebody, say, hey, let's go to lunch, let's talk about our evidence rooms, uh, that builds inertia. Starting those conversations, intentional conversations, it also builds community. So that's one thing that you can do today to impact change. Uh, Number five is start small and think big. And I hopefully you can see that screen. That screen is a shelf with tons and tons and tons of packages. It's my least favorite thing to look at. I hate seeing shelves organized that way. It makes me sad in my heart to see those things, and it gets overwhelming. If you magnify that by a factor of 50, you know, there is disorder in some of our shops and some of our places, and it's mind numbing, you know. But start with one shelf. Start with one shelf. Start with one half of one shelf if you can't break it down to a shelf. But the important thing is to start somewhere. If you see a problem, start somewhere. The thing we don't want to do, the worst thing, the opposite of starting small, is to go take another package and cram it into that shelf the way we've always done it. Um, Start small, think big. I mean, we want to have an organized, clean, sustainable operation. But that happens one shelf at a time. That happens one location at a time. That happens one refrigerator at a time. It just, I mean, these are small steps that you can take. You don't have to eat the whole thing at once. So you can think big, but start small. Next would be think outside the craft bag. A lot of us, or at least maybe it's just me, maybe I'm the only one that does this, but I tend to think about my problems, especially evidence problems, as only evidence problems. Like this only affects evidence managers or evidence custodians. But if we think outside of that craft bag, we think outside of our vault, outside the box, and how things impact others outside us, sometimes that can build kind of momentum for change even outside of your unit. When I think about trying to improve evidence entry or data entry for a submitting officer in patrol, when I think about improving that officer's experience submitting evidence to my unit, that pays off dividends. One, it makes my system better. It also makes their job easier. And those types of things where we're thinking outside of ourselves, outside of the craft bag, outside the vault, um, those pay off. When we think about how stakeholders are impacted or how other groups are impacted by our work, it makes us think differently about the work that we do. So, number seven, number seven is practice an attitude of gratitude. This is not something that I do well, but this is something that James does well and at Orange County is celebrating small successes. Um, we get so much more energy generated and change generated when we celebrate small successes. I'm not saying to give every officer that submits a piece of evidence to your unit this week a participation trophy. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when somebody does something right, catch people doing something right and let them know that you see them. Let them know that you see them doing something correctly and that you appreciate it. There is value in that. And it changes our mindset from officers can't do anything right to this officer did something right. And I want to take a moment and I want to point that out. James, tell us what y'all do at Orange County to kind of.
Well, for starters, we kind of improved our right of refusal policy because it seemed like some of our folks in the unit kind of felt like that was their really their only opportunity to make corrections based on kind of flexing. And I kind of had an issue with that. And I talked to them and I said, hey, maybe use that as an opportunity to be more humble and explaining and teaching more of an educational moment when you have deputies or officers coming in to make corrections to their package. Because if they feel like you're being negative to them or being demeaning to them, then what's the point of us being a support service? I mean, our function is really to take care of our patrolmen and investigations units. So I think we've failed if we've ostracized them to the point where they don't want to come down and and have to fix something of their evidence. So always reinforcing that, letting them know we appreciate their cooperation. If there's anything they need from us, we're always available. Showing them the right way how to do it, and then from time to time we'll send them an email and let them know, hey, thanks for the way you did this packaging or how you do this, or if there's anything that you need from our unit that could better help you do your job. So those are the kind of things that's the action that we try to take to keep the reputation good. I mean, we have 2,700 deputies, so it's a labor intensive thing, but I think it pays off dividends in the end. And one thing for homicide or for our this came from another agency where they were kind of out of sight, out of mind. No one ever really paid them any attention. So they put a big whiteboard out in front of their basement area where the command staff come in every day. And on that whiteboard, they started putting positive messages. And also, if their homicide unit, say they had a big high profile case and their homicide unit got life without the possibility of parole and they did a great job, that unit would just thank their homicide guys. Hey, thank you so much for the work that you put into, and this is the outcome. And by doing that, like praising another unit, you're actually reminding your command staff that you're actually part of that process, the legislative process as well, or judicial process as well. So those are little subliminal ways of kind of helping to elevate your unit or at least get some positive attention to an otherwise unseen area of the department.
Cool. I love that idea. I think it's really important to be on the lookout. I mean, most of us are wired to be on the lookout for problems. We want to find a problem and point out a problem. But sometimes our vision, our sight, I mean, these are progressive lenses because my eyesight is crap now. But we need to have our eyes focused on problems and good things. I mean, look, keep your eyes open, seek opportunities to praise people, to write a commendation. That pays off and creates dividends that you can't get back. So number 8 is random acts of kindness. Now this might seem a little fluffy, but it's good just to do something good for the purpose of just doing it because it's good. Those kinds of things generate energy, and I've got one for you today. Uh, it's my friends at MAPE, the Missouri Association for Property and Evidence. They recently launched their website. And one of the
Yeah.
cool things on their website, and they started in 2019, MAPE launched kind of October, November of 2019. Then the world closed down for a year and a half. So this is a new organization for people in Missouri to get together and and build networks, build relationships, educate one another on evidence. It's a great organization. They just launched their website, or I just got the link to their website. But one of the things that you can do on their website, and I think it would be cool to do this, even if it's just a buck or two or something, is you can actually donate online to their association. They're a new association. They're just getting started. It takes a lot of money to reach people and to do the work that they're trying to accomplish for the state of Missouri. So one random act of kindness that you could do today could cost you anywhere from $1, which is not a lot, but there is no limit. There's no upper limit. I think it'd be cool if you got no other ideas in your head. Log into Missouri Evidence, moevidence.com, www.moevidence.com, and donate to them. Give them some money. Help them get started. You can be a part of somebody else's change process. You vote with your money, you vote with your mouth, you vote with your actions. This is something that you can do that is proactive and is going to make a difference. Even if it's not in your state, Missouri could benefit as well. So that's number 8. 8 things that you could do. Number 9 is a word of discouragement. And what I want to say here, as far as culture change, is to be thinking about this one concept as you move forward and as you start thinking about culture change. We are hardwired as human beings to pay more attention to criticism and discouraging words. That's just what we're attuned to that frequency. We hear that stuff. And if there is scientific research on basically positive and negative feedback, that for every discouraging word, for every word of discouragement that you hear from someone, it takes 20 affirmations or words of encouragement to actually make up for the damage that you do with that one word of discouragement. So we're not always going to be encouraging. We're not always going to be able to just be all Mary Poppins and sunshine, but it's really important to be judicious with those and to also consider the impacts and implications of those words of discouragement when they have to be used. Number 10, the last thing you could do today, and I don't want to drag this out too long, is fail forward. When it comes to culture change, when it comes to changing the culture of evidence management, whether it's at your agency or in this industry, we're going to fail. And failure is an absolute option. It's going to happen. We'll probably fail more than we succeed, and that's okay. I think just being comfortable with the concept of it's all right to fail. We're going to have missteps. There are going to be things that we try that don't work. This whole episode might be one of those things for you. This might be an hour of your life that you're never getting back. But We learn from those mistakes. We move forward from those mistakes. We don't make those same mistakes again. That's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. So, failing forward. Those are 10 things that you can do today to start the culture change process. And I think I lost James. I hope I didn't lose his interest. He just had funner things to do. Uh, but get busy living or get busy dying. That's one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies. It's time to start doing something because the stakes are too high. The job that you do is too important, and the culture that we exist has been so pervasive for so long. It just needs to change, and we have to be that particular change. No one's coming in to save it for us. No one's coming in to change our minds or to change our uh, circumstances. It's got to start with us, and that's what we kind of need to move forward with. So I don't know if there'd be a lot of questions. Yep, James dropped off. There we go. Jake with MAPE. You can join MAPE as an associate member. Doesn't matter where you are in the country. For 20 bucks, they're prorating things. They need your help. Uh, so that's if you're not help. So I've got more. I'm reading notes here, and James did lose connection, so he is halfway here. But Virginia Connolly, one thing I've been encouraging for both records and property is to go to patrol briefings, just sit in the back of the room, allow them to ask you questions, open the dialogue to help them be successful. I love that. I mean, that is essentially, I mean, those are, we're in a relationship business, you know? We are absolutely in the business of building relationships. The more personal we make it, the more we invest in our agencies and in our officers and in our communities, the better off we're going to be. So that right there, just going to a briefing, just sitting in the back, making yourself available. That's number 11. So you actually got 11 for the price of 10 today. Um, but if anybody has any questions or comments, I don't know that there's going to be a lot. Um, I appreciate you being here. James has fallen off, but he is still out there somewhere. So let's talk about, and your computer didn't freeze. I froze. Next time on the evidence show, we actually doubled up. I had to rearrange some things with this particular episode, but our next episode is September 23rd at 2 p.m. Central. We will be live in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Northern Kentucky, however the case may be. But this is the concept. Let's go to lunch and talk technology. I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm going to let you infer some things from that. But I think it's a really cool concept, and I'll be with my friends at Tracker having a conversation. So infer from that what you will. Uh, but tune in September 23rd at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern, and I can't do math in my head, so I think it's yeah. I shouldn't have just said anything. Uh, our next three episodes, like I mentioned, are September 23rd, October 14th, and November 11th. A November to remember. We will be broadcasting on each of those. You can always catch these online at evidencemanagement.com. Thank you for being here, and I would just encourage you to go out and do something. You know, uh, do something today. We tried to give you 10 things, now 11 that you could do. Uh, Start somewhere because that change begins with you. So thanks. Have a great Labor Day. I look forward to seeing you next time.